Hi there, crime fighters, and welcome back for another preview for this week's radio talk show for American DA Live. Today we're here with Mr. Rob Sanders, and we're really excited because he's going to talk about this case called the Commonwealth versus Farrell Wilson. Wilson, I think?
Yes, that's right.
All right, great. Could you tell us a little bit about that case, please?
Sure. Farrell Wilson was a participant in a poker game in the City Heights housing complex in the city of Covington, Kentucky. He apparently didn't like the way his poker hands were going. He decided to take out a gun and rob the folks at the poker game. Covington police were called. They responded to this housing complex that sits very isolated up on a hill by itself. There's only one way in and one way out. So the officers respond up there in a pretty large group. It was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning on a weekday. They get up there, they find the folks that have been robbed. The people all that he was playing poker with all knew Mr. Wilson and told the police Farrell Wilson robbed us. They gave him a couple different addresses up in the housing complex that Mr. Wilson might be found hiding out at. One was Mr. Wilson's girlfriend's house. The other one was the girlfriend's mother's residence. I said house, it really wasn't a house. Both of these are apartments in one big complex that we're talking about. So the police go to the girlfriend's house first. They don't find Mr. Wilson, but they figured he had been there recently because they found his wallet and identification at her residence. So she tells them where her mother lives, and the police respond down to the mother's house. It's a second-floor apartment. It was a one-bedroom apartment with only 3 small rooms in it, a living room, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a very small bathroom off the bedroom. Before the officers could even get inside, they surround the apartment. There's 2 officers in the back and several officers out front. They begin banging on the door. Now, what the officers didn't know at this time is that the lady who lived there had actually left the residence. She had left because Mr. Wilson showed up in the middle of the night in somewhat of a panic, asking her where her daughter was. This scared her, so she took off to her daughter's house to find out what was wrong with her daughter, because the way Mr. Wilson was acting, she thought that something had happened to her daughter. So she took off so fast, she left her keys there, she left her phone there, and she didn't even lock her apartment. But when the police went to try and make contact with the resident, they found the door locked. They started banging loud on the front door. This is a second-floor apartment, and next thing you know, the officers in the rear of the building see a person that they knew to be Farrell Wilson, and also matching the clothing description that the victims of the robbery had provided, climbing out the back window of this second-story apartment. They tried to wait and be real quiet and let him drop down to the ground so they could make their arrest rather quickly, but Mr. Wilson spotted them, and when he did spot them, they started yelling at him to show us your hands and get down here, and you're under arrest, and stop police, all those kinds of things. Instead of following the officer's commands, he went back inside the apartment. When these 2 officers started yelling, there was a 3rd officer that went to the back of the building as well. When Mr. Wilson re-emerged in the window, he had a handgun and he started shooting at the officers. 2 of the officers, Officer Mark Richardson and Officer Mike Gilliland from Covington Police, were actually shot. Officer Richardson was shot in the toe, and Officer Gilliland was shot in the pants leg. Fortunately for him, that was just a grazing wound. It didn't actually penetrate his pants leg. They returned fire at Mr. Wilson, and Mr. Wilson stopped firing for a moment. He went back inside, came back out, started firing again. All 3 officers that were in the rear of the building returned fire. It was actually in the second volley of gunfire where Officer Richardson was shot in the foot. He called out on the radio, told the other officers what had happened, that he was hit, and while all the officers on the scene, both in the front and the back, were working on getting Officer Richardson to some medical treatment, get him to safety out of the scene, Mr. Wilson ran out the front door of the apartment and pointed a weapon at one of the officers who was in the front of the residence, causing that officer to start shooting at Mr. Wilson again. Unfortunately, it didn't hit Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson was able to make it into the woods where he fled, and due to the darkness and the terrain that they were on, which is very steep, hilly terrain, Mr. Wilson got away. He was actually captured in Cincinnati, Ohio, about 12 hours later, hiding out in a very shady motel over in that city. Do you want me to go on about the trial now? Or are we
Yeah, what exactly was he charged with? It seems like he has a lot to be charged with, so.
Yes, he did. He was charged with 3 counts of attempted murder and 3 counts of assault in the 3rd degree, 1 count of assault in the 1st degree, and as well as possession of a handgun by convicted felon. Mr. Wilson went to trial on the attempted murder charge, and the assault first and the assault thirds were actually merged by the court into the attempted murder charges as lesser included. So the jury only considered the attempted murder charges, and they only got to the assaults if he was found not guilty of the attempted murder. But after about a 2-week jury trial at the very beginning of January this year, the jury found Mr. Wilson guilty of all 3 counts of attempted murder. They also found him guilty of being a persistent felony offender in the 2nd degree. He had a prior felony conviction out of Kenton County for drug trafficking. Mr. Wilson was originally given a 45-year sentence by the jury. That was 15 years on each count of attempted murder that were run consecutively for a total of 45 years. However, after finding him guilty also of being a persistent felony offender in the 2nd degree, the jury enhanced that to 20 years on each count, and they ordered those, or suggested to the judge that those also be run consecutively for a total of 60 years. So that was a very good outcome for the Commonwealth, something that we were very happy with, something that Covington Police obviously were very happy with, but it still left the possession of a handgun by convicted felon charge hanging out there, because under Kentucky law, the only time you get to tell the jury that a defendant is a convicted felon before they're found guilty is on a handgun or firearm by felon case. So also under Kentucky law, you can't try that because you can tell the jury that they're a felon. You can't try it with any other charges. So we had a 2nd trial in May, and it was pushed back to May so that we got an entirely different jury panel. Didn't have to worry about any jurors that had heard the 1st trial. We tried the possession of a handgun by convicted felon charge. That was only about a 2-day trial, but Mr. Wilson was convicted very expeditiously by that jury. They also recommended the maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. He came for final sentencing the day after that trial, and Judge Patricia Summey, who's one of our circuit court judges here in Kenton County, she presided over both jury trials. She sentenced Mr. Wilson to the maximum 70 years in prison, choosing to run the 60-year sentence and the 70-year sentence consecutively. So under Kentucky law, Mr. Wilson will be eligible for parole after serving 20 years of that now 70-year sentence.
Well, that does sound like a win for the Commonwealth, so that's great. Well, thanks for talking to us, Mr. Rob Sanders, and we can't wait to hear more about it, this trial this Friday. So thank you so much.